The live stream is up. Chair Meeks will now convene the briefing with his opening remarks.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I know there are a lot of us here and a lot to cover. So I'm going to keep brief. We have about 90 minutes, and hopefully we'll get to everybody in time. Also, to increase accessibility, this briefing will have simultaneous French language interpretation via YouTube. And you may access the link on our website, foreignaffairs.house.gov. Now, as all know, the situation in Haiti has rapidly deteriorated over the last few years. Sadly, President Moïse's assassination in July, the devastating earthquake in August, and the heartbreaking Del Rio repatriation that began last month are only exacerbating this multi-pronged crisis. Last April, with the hopes of helping the Haitian people address the pressing challenges their country faces, I led 68 members of Congress in a letter to the Biden administration calling on the immediate appointment of a special envoy for Haiti, and was pleased to see the appointment of Ambassador Foote 2 months ago to that position. Unfortunately, Ambassador Foote's role ended last month after he resigned, citing irreconcilable policy differences between himself and the Biden administration. While I look forward to continued engagement with the Biden administration on matters concerning Haiti, I believe that members of this committee and the public should have the opportunity to hear Ambassador Foote's assessments and recommendations in a public forum. The reality is that our current policy towards Haiti is a holdover from the previous administration and is in desperate need of fresh faces and perspectives. Although I have nothing but respect and admiration for our current ambassador's years of service to our nation, especially in these challenging times, I am concerned that using business as usual diplomacy is counterproductive in a country which is demanding closer ties and an ear toward the recommendations of civil society and grassroots groups. Rather than working with the broadly representative Civil Society Commission that has a well-respected and thought-out plan for a transition government in Haiti, our embassy in Port-au-Prince is continuing to throw its full support behind the less than credible interim Henry government and calling for elections when everyone knows the country is simply not ready for free and fair elections at this time. That is why I'm eager to hear from Ambassador Foote today. And I'm hopeful that his analysis and recommendations will provide additional perspective to those of us in Congress as we continue to engage with the Biden administration, the Haitian government, and most importantly, the Haitian people. Now, I want all to know that this briefing is not about any individual. This briefing is about Haiti and the Haiti people and trying to get it right. We need to make sure that we hear from all sides. And I want folks to know that the briefing that the committee will do will be a continuous one as we focus on the best route to be of assistance and listening to the people of Haiti, its civil society, so that we could find a way for their will to be done. So I thank you for that. And I will now turn to Representative Salazar from Florida, who's filling in for Ranking Member McCall for her brief remarks.
Thank you, Chairman. Wonderful to be with you, and thank you for holding this critical briefing on Haiti. Thank you to my colleagues on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the Haitian Caucus, and most importantly, the Congressional Black Caucus, who is joining us in denouncing the atrocities we have seen at the border. And thank you to Ambassador Daniel Foote for coming to share your experience with us, for being courageous, and for holding true to your values. I, in District Number 27 in South Florida, represent an important part of the Haitian diaspora in the state of Florida. But unfortunately, the Biden administration has abandoned Haiti. For months, this administration has enforced selective border policies and has shown great hypocrisy in their treatment of our Haitian brothers and sisters. For months, our Haitian brothers and sisters have watched as migrants from other parts of the world have been allowed free passage across the southern border. But when it was their turn for searching for freedom, this administration trampled over the rights to due process of law as they have given to many others who were crossing the border in the last 7 months. But this administration has not only abandoned Haitians, they have also abandoned the Afro-Cubans. When Afro-Cubans were having their heads cracked open in the middle of the street by Castro thugs, Secretary Mayorga said, if you take to the sea, we will not let you into the United States. Just as this administration has turned their back on the vulnerable Haitians, they have shown the same disregard for Afro-Cubans, who remain the most marginalized community in Cuba, despite making up 35% of the Cuban population. Where was the Biden administration when the Afro-Cubans were crying for freedom and this past summer? Where was this administration when our Haitian brothers and sisters went through hell to beg for help and refuge at the southern border? Today, I stand here in support of the two most beleaguered islands in the Caribbean. The Biden administration must treat Haitians with dignity. Our two countries have very deep bonds. We have over 1 million Haitians in the United States. But this year has been a terrible year for the Haitians. First, a historic earthquake, another one. Weeks later, the president was assassinated. The island has been ravaged by rampant political corruption and lack of political stability. Poor Haitians. They're constantly fighting gangsters and thugs that terrorize the poor Haitians who just want to live a decent living. But despite these unimaginable hardships, Haiti remains an important ally of the United States. They stand against communist China, and they have recognized our key ally, Taiwan. Haitians and Cubans deserve both a fair process to choose their leaders and their political destiny. But where is the United States when it comes to these two processes? I repeat, I am proud to be here today alongside many members of Congress who support this cause, but especially my colleagues on the Congressional Black Caucus. I have not always seen eye to eye with many of them on many issues, but today, I am very proud to be standing together with them and defending Haiti and the Afro-Cubans. I look forward, Mr. Ambassador, to hear from you, and I thank you once again for staying true to your values.
Thank you. I now turn to Representative Sears, the chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, Civil Security, Migration, and International Economic Policy. Mr. Suarez, Chairman Suarez, you're now recognized for 1 minute.
Can you hear me? All right, first of all, I want to thank you, Chairman, for hosting this important briefing. And thank you, Ambassador Foote, for speaking with us. The Special Envoy for Haiti is a position, something that many of us in the House had advocated for. So I fully agree with Chairman Meeks that it is important for us to hear from you. For years, I've been very concerned about the current direction of US policy towards Haiti. I was appalled at the treatment of Haitian migrants at the border. And I have said many times, the issue that are preventing Haitians from returning to the country needs to be resolved in Haiti, not at the border. I am deeply concerned about the worsening security situation in Haiti, and particularly the growing role of gangs. I am also frustrated by the slow pace of the investigation into the assassination of Jovenel Moïse. Resolving this murder is important if we want to help Haiti move forward in a better direction. As we assess our current policy, I do not believe we should put our faith in the interim government. We need to look beyond the corrupt officials that have captured much of Haiti, of much of the Haitian government, and instead engage in wide-range civil society and community-based organizations. I look forward to hearing your suggestion, Ambassador Foote, to discuss what role the U.S. should play in supporting Haitian-led solutions to the country's current crisis. I'm also concerned about the relationship between the Haitians and the Dominican Republic. There are tensions there that we must look to resolve. And one of the concerns that I have is the Dominican Republic has tried to help the Haitian community. And as it was told to me, every time they offer vaccines or they offer food and they send it to the ports, it disappears. We have to address that if we're going to get not just the Dominican Republic assisting Haiti, but the rest of the Western Hemisphere to move Haiti forward. So I thank you again, Ambassador Foote, and thank you, Chairman, for hosting this critical briefing.
Thank you, Chairman Sires. Now, again, we've got 90 minutes. I'm going to go straight to questions. And we're going to use the 5-minute format that we generally utilize when we're doing a hearing. But I want to repeat, this is not a hearing. This is a briefing. But in order to get as many members in, I'm going to be pretty strict on the 5-minute rule for questions and answers so that we can get that in. So I'll start the questions to Ambassador Foote. And clearly, as I've indicated in my opening statement, we've seen the past policies of the prior administration. We've seen where the prior administration, in fact, called Haiti and the Haitian people BS, using an explicitive. And the reason why I wanted to make sure that we had a special envoy so that we can move and look at the policies and how we should move forward away from how Haiti had been treated under the prior administration. So now the first thing that comes to mind is in your resignation letter, you wrote that Haitians need immediate assistance to restore the government's ability to naturalize the gangs and restore order through the national police. I know for me, this is a very complicated matter because even domestically, we are struggling with how law enforcement should show up for communities. We also know that organized criminal groups are no match for ill-equipped police force, that safety is essential for stability in Haiti. So my question to you is, what do you mean when you said neutralize gangs and restore order? What does that look like in the current political and economic context, particularly when our goal is to support the Haitian people as they chart their own course?
Chairman Meeks, Chairman Sires, Representative Salazar, and members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting me here today to discuss Haiti. And Chairman, thanks for your question about security, first of all. We were there on July 23rd in Cap-Haïtien for the funeral of assassinated President Jovenel Moïse, and you got to see a little bit of the chaos that went on that day. And I had the opportunity a couple of times since then to go down to Port-au-Prince, including some of the dicey neighborhoods, and the gangs run Port-au-Prince. It is in their control. It is in their hands. They are better equipped and better armed than the police. They control the main highways and transit routes, not only across Port-au-Prince, but across the country. And they are now moving out of the slum areas and have been in areas of Pétionville where there has never been gang violence, including Pétionville, Peggyville, the more elite neighborhoods up the hill. When I first went there, I asked everybody, so can you guys do elections soon? What do you think? And they all said no because of security. security is not only impacting the ability to hold elections, it's everyday life. There have been a number of massacres. And when I say massacres, I think the largest one was 72 people. So you're talking about large numbers of people being killed by the gangs back in 2019, I believe. The kidnapping for ransom has become just part of the society. There were 20 kidnappings last Saturday on one day in Port-au-Prince. Women and men are afraid to leave their homes, to go shopping, to go out at night, et cetera. So clearly they need assistance in security.
So let me with the limited time, Ambassador. So are you making any specific, or did you have and make any specific recommendations?
Yes, I did, sir. We recommended that the Haitian National Police establish an anti-gang task force with several components, including commandos, communicators, intelligence, people with the prosecutors, and they will need to be trained. They will need to, the unit will be designed, and then they will be vetted fully. The State Department's International Narcotics and Law Enforcement is moving ahead with the security part of the training. They'll be vetted, polygraphed, I believe, not only the folks in this task force, but through the command of the police. And they will have to be outfitted as well with everything from camouflage pants and boots to lethal aid, vehicles, et cetera.
Let me cut you off again because I've got little time left. Now that you have resigned, would you recommend another envoy be sent to Haiti?
That's a good question. I think Brian Nichols, the new Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere in the State Department, knows Haiti well. I've worked with Brian before, but he's got a complex hemisphere on his plate as well. I think a senior level official who knows Haiti and can focus on Haiti will ensure probably a more thoughtful policy on Haiti.
And lastly, do you believe that a congressional delegation to Haiti would be helpful at this time or not?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was asked by some of my Haitian friends today to mention that, but you did it for me. Thank you.
Very good. I now turn to, I believe, Mr. Shabbat is next to make or ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Ambassador. Haiti, I believe, is the second largest recipient of U.S. assistance in the Western Hemisphere, yet it obviously still remains the poorest country in the region. How can we make the aid that we do give to Haiti actually improve the viability of the country, the conditions of the people there, and not just continue to encourage dependency? How can we actually help the country to improve? It seems like we've tried for years to do this and have been woefully unsuccessful in that effort thus far. What would you suggest?
Thank you, Congressman. I was involved in the planning of the $5.1 billion supplemental funding for Haiti post-2010 earthquake. And I was struck by the fact that it was all Americans in the room. So when I went back 10 years later and see that Haiti's much worse, I can say that we know how not to fix Haiti. I believe we need Haitians in the room and Haitian buy-in and Haitian-led solutions. I think USAID would probably tell you the same thing. The last time in the 2010 and before that, I won't go back that far because I don't understand that well, but a lot of the grants were done with large American NGOs, many of the typical ones here in Washington. And I think they are looking, particularly post this August earthquake, to focus on local NGOs as opposed to giving huge grants to American NGOs. And I think Haitians need to be the employees of these NGOs and need to be the ones who are trained to help their countrymen and women.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Since May and potentially even earlier, The government of Panama, who we work with very closely and have for a long time now, Panama warned the administration of increased flows of Haitian migrants transiting Panama towards the U.S. Migrants that were interviewed claimed that they were kind of lured by the pro-migration messaging coming from the Biden administration. Although it was mixed message, sometimes, somebody in the administration, the vice president said, don't come. But in essence, it's like one hand is saying, don't come, and the other hand is saying, come on. As we discuss humanitarian issues, we can't really, you have to bring up the failures of the Biden administration that directly contributed to the humanitarian crisis at the U.S.'s southern border, where people were given false hope for entry into the U.S. Why did the administration neglect, do you believe, the repeated warnings from Panama, for example, who's a long-standing U.S. partner, that people were coming? And obviously, if you looked at the people under the bridges, they were just not ready for the massive humanity that came and the horrible conditions that the people had to live in under there, as well as the neighbors who had to, tolerate this tough situation as well.
Thank you, Congressman. It's difficult for me because I wasn't involved in the decisions with the Biden administration to speculate on what was going through their minds. But you're right, and I heard Congressman Cires say it also, that this problem needs to be solved in Haiti, or they will continue to come to our borders, particularly when they hear that their countrymen got in earlier in July, August, early September up there. But deportation back to Haiti is not the answer right now. I am not saying that intending migrants who are in illegal status shouldn't be deported, but Haiti is too dangerous. Our own diplomats cannot leave our compounds in Port-au-Prince without armed guard, and the already failed essential services delivery of the Haitian government is really overwhelmed in places like Cité Soleil, the biggest slum in the hemisphere. I've seen pictures of waste and stuff. So deportation in the short term is not going to make Haiti more stable. In fact, it's going to make it worse.
Thank you. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I'm now going to turn over to Ashley to recognize members in the order that she sees them for purposes of asking questions. So Ashley, would you please recognize members going forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, we have Representative Cires.
Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. Ambassador Foote, thank you very much. I've been saying for a long time that the problem needs to be resolved in Haiti and not outside, and not with outside help going in there. But I have to tell you, I was in Haiti maybe 2 years ago, and we met with the police. And I have to say that I was shocked at the conditions that these police officers were trying to do their job. I mean, we went to see them at lunch, and they didn't have a table to sit on. So if you're asking me or suggesting that what we need to do is set up some units against gangs and so forth, I mean, we're talking starting from the bottom. It'll take years before they are effective. And I don't know if they'll be effective in a few years. So, I mean, am I wrong?
I would never suggest that you're wrong, Congressman.
Oh, no, I've been wrong before.
But what I will tell you is starting in '94, with Ray Kelly and NYPD and an international contingent, we started training the Haitian National Police, and we've been training them pretty steady since then. So when I left in 2012, they were an adequate police force of 14,000 members. And over the past 5 years, the police has become politicized, and political appointees from deceased President Moise have come in and developed ties with the gangs. But the police writ large hasn't gone from 100 to 0. It's gone from 100 to, I'd say, 50 or 60. So starting with a smaller unit of a few hundred, I think within 6 to 10 months, we'll be able to be effective. To transform the whole police back to where it was, yes, that will take years, but to get them to a point where they can have an impact on the gangs, I strongly believe that with our experience in international narcotics and law enforcement in the State Department, that they can start pinging the gangs within 6 to 12 months.
Well, I worry that the gangs now are better armed, better organized. They control larger sections of Haiti. I hate to say this, I don't agree with you that it'll take 6 to 9.
Okay.
But the situation is so dire. The security, because you can't send people back because
I agree.
there's no security. You
agree.
can't have people go out on the streets because there's no security. You can't even send supplies or vaccines because there's no security. I mean, I was talking to the president of the Dominican Republic. He says, we want to help as much as we can, but when we send a shipment over, as soon as they unload it, it's gone. And quite frankly, it's very discouraging to hear that from the neighbor, that they're trying to help. And what he told me is that Haiti is divided probably into 7 or 8 sections, which gangs controlling sections of Haiti. So, I mean, you will have to start by taking out a section here and a section there. It's just a very difficult job for a police force that needs to have the confidence of the community. It needs to be well armed. It needs to be organized. I don't know, 6 months is not going to cut it for me. Sorry.
Fair enough. Fair enough, Congressman. I spent 90 minutes with the foreign minister of the Dominican Republic. I also worked on that side of the island. And so I understand their concerns, and they have the most to lose, obviously. But I welcome, or I'm sure the administration welcomes other ideas, but it appears it's going to have to be some sort of organic Haitian solution to this, because I don't see an international intervention at this point.
There's too much resentment for the international people to
Like cholera and other things, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
Representative,
Okay, did you say ISA?
I did.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Just want to make sure. Ambassador, Haiti is roughly the 19th poorest country and one of about 25 countries that we considered failed states. Would that be an approximately accurate statement?
At this point, since the assassination, sir.
Okay, and so I'm just going to read a portion of the countries that are similar in their economic per capita income. Just a quick blush of them: Syria, South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, Chad, Sudan, Afghanistan, Zimbabwe, and I'll stop there. These countries have a great similarity, and that is that they all have failed governments. They all have widespread gangs and tribalism, if you will. You you have to find someone to protect you. It's not likely to be your government. And everyone I named has USAID programs and has been the subject of years of efforts by this committee. You'd say that was pretty fair. So my problem right now, and my question to you is, I'm of the opinion that we should treat Haitian refugees the same as we treat other refugees, perhaps even better, because they are in our hemisphere. But I'm also, have some consternation, which is that we are taking in a massive amount of people, not because they've been adjudicated to be entitled, but we're taking them in because they, in fact, show up at our border. We release them. We have already released more than 2, maybe 3 years backlog of people that we're not going to get to. We're not going to be able to adjudicate theirs. And so let's just say hypothetically, half of all the Haitians were admitted. They're going to wander around for the next several years. Well, for no particular reason, the other half, and I'm using that as a hypothetical number, were returned to this crime-torn country. My question to you, and I know it's not wholly within your history and jurisdiction and experience, but to try to be fair, wouldn't we be best to begin a wholesale program of really looking at who should be brought here and adjudicating them where they are, rather than encouraging them to come and take their chances getting to our border?
Yes, Congressman. I think in theory, that's the way our immigration system is supposed to work, right? People apply for non-immigrant or immigrant visas overseas, and then when it comes through, they go to the States. So yes, I think we all agree that immigration needs a broad look, and we need to take a thoughtful look. My point with Haiti right now, and I agree that we shouldn't, based on geopolitics, favor one country's refugees over another. But I think the situation on the ground, countries where temporary protected status is in effect, for instance, I know that we're not repatriating people to Afghanistan right now. And having served in both places, the security in situation is not that dire, but it's not far off. And we're deporting people to Haiti. I think we need to come up with a way to uphold our international obligations under the Vienna Convention, sorry.
I agree. Let me just give you one follow-up question since we're on a roll. So if we as a committee are looking at doing what's right for the Haitians and what's right for other countries and taking a fair share and taking the most needy, those who would essentially under whatever rules are adjudicated, don't we have to look at what the court ruled, which was the stay in Mexico was valid and properly thought out? And in many cases, for people like the Haitians, where it's a huge project to get to the United States, shouldn't we extend what we might call remain in Mexico to remain in Haiti and begin helping there, where we certainly have an embassy and the resources to allow these people to make their applications?
Yeah, I agree that we need better capacities to do that in Port-au-Prince and in Haiti. However, the economically disadvantaged and the people who have been refugees by the gangs are going to continue to migrate from Haiti right now. The situation is that bad, and we need capabilities to process and administer these intending immigrants in a humane manner rather than just piecemeal or wholesale repatriation to a city where an American official is not allowed to go outside of the walls of the compound fortress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think this is an example where on a hearing / briefing, we're finding a lot of common ground, and hopefully we'll find a way to push forward for this and other countries in similar peril. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Representative Deutsch,
Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Deutsch, you're muted.
Let's try that. Ambassador Foote, thanks very much for appearing today. I appreciate the candor with which you expressed your concerns about the current U.S. Haiti policy in your resignation letter. Ambassador Foote, represent Broward County. I see my colleagues on as well from Broward. And as you know, South Florida has the largest Haitian American community in the country. The diaspora community here is vibrant and engaged. They've been shocked and they've been horrified by what they've seen over the past several months. And I want to share some of their specific concerns before I ask you a very specific question. First, the processing of visas at the embassy has been incredibly slow, and it was even before COVID. I understand the real challenges facing our diplomats in Haiti, which I know you'll speak to further. We want people to come legally, but I'm being told of people waiting for student visa appointments for now more than 2 years. Second, my community is hearing reports of people being told that they are being moved to a holding location only to find themselves getting off a plane back in Haiti with no warning and no chance to give an interview. As you can imagine, the shock and trauma of that scenario is exacerbated when so many of these people lived in third countries for many years before trying to come to the United States. And finally, there is great concern about civil society and diaspora groups being denied participation in the government process, which brings me to my question. According to the World Bank, personal remittances from the diaspora made up almost a quarter of Haiti's GDP in 2019. And while the financial contributions continue to be desperately needed, Haiti continues to suffer and diaspora voices are often not heard. And while the Haitian diaspora community is incredibly diverse and there are a wide variety of opinions, I am sure that most would agree that current crises need to be addressed and need to be addressed with urgency. So that brings me to my question. Do you believe the Haitian government, opposition, and civil society groups have done enough to engage with the diaspora? Has the United States and the international community done enough to give voice to the diaspora? And what strategies would you propose to help the Haitian diaspora increase its leverage and organize more effectively? And again, I'm really grateful to have this opportunity with you. Thank you.
My pleasure, Mr. Representative. In answer to your questions, I don't think that there's a lot of consideration right now in Port-au-Prince by the opposition, by the government, by civil society about having diaspora as part of the dialogue, part of the conversation. But I will tell you a couple of these political agreements, accords, drafts that are floating around do include diaspora participation. And civil society was most strident with me and about the need for diaspora, because there's also a feeling in Haiti that the diaspora has gone away and gotten rich and forgotten about. Is that plays in, but the bigger feeling in the country right now is that the diaspora who have come to the United States, Canada, France, wherever, been successful in a society of rule of law, send money back, that should be part of it, to the point where there are conversations about when Haiti goes back to elect its new parliament, to having diaspora members, seats set aside for the diaspora. So I do think the diaspora should play a greater role. The challenge is always to find groups that are representative of the diaspora, because there are almost 300 Haiti diaspora groups in the US alone, and that's a lot.
Ambassador Foote, thank you very much. Again, grateful for your briefing today, and we look forward to following up on a lot of these issues as we go forward, even the rest of this discussion. Thanks so much. I yield back.
Representative Perry,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding the informational briefing. Thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time to be with us. I'm just wondering, there's a news, or well, let me back up. There's a report that the foreign minister of Panama had warned the Biden administration about these Haitian refugee flows coming up through Panama and the very dangerous trek through the gap there, and those warnings from the Panamanian foreign minister were not acknowledged, and it appears in some way, at least in open source reporting, that the administration was either unaware, unprepared, or just lacked care about all these Haitian migrants showing up at Del Rio, Texas. Can you speak to what might have been, what was the administration thinking? Did they have no clue? Did they just ignore that, or what was going on there?
Well, that's a fantastic question, Congressman. I was not involved in the border side of discussions with DHS and the information that may have flowed from our Latin American friends throughout the region. But one thing I will say that I heard one of my colleagues say is that the migrants would be better off in Port-au-Prince than they were under that bridge. And they're not. That's how bad Port-au-Prince is. They had real tents and they're under a bridge. In Port-au-Prince, it's under the hot sun with no.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible. It looks, in America, it's shocking to the American people that it's essentially a third world country under a bridge in Del Rio, Texas. But let me ask you this then. From the photographs I saw and the information that I got from the DHS about those folks, particularly under that bridge, the majority of them apparently being people originally of Haitian origin, but many of them, maybe the majority of them, coming from South America. In other words, not coming directly from Haiti and then up through Central America and Mexico to Del Rio, but literally coming from South America. Do you see that as appropriate? Why would they have left South America? They weren't in Haiti. I understand Port-au-Prince is dangerous, and look, we've got more kids killed in Chicago or shot in Chicago than we do have children that have died from COVID. So look, I'm not saying it's an optimal situation, obviously, but I would like you to speak to the fact that these folks weren't coming. Many of them, essentially, probably the majority, are not coming directly from Haiti, but coming from South America. Do they have a right to come to the United States of America and cross illegally? And was that an appropriate action on their part? I can't hear you, Ambassador.
Ambassador, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Obviously, we want all intending migrants to follow our immigration law. However, many of those from South America left after the 2010 earthquake, Representative, and found with COVID and economic slowdowns, they didn't have jobs. Racism is difficult in some of the Latino countries of South America. And as you said, there were noises made by the administration of softening immigration policies, which is what happened the last time we saw major Haitian immigration problems in the 80s. And it was the same reason. There was perception that it was easier to get into the US at that point.
So essentially, I guess, in a way, you're saying the administration signaled that it was okay to come from South America and enter the border of the United States of America illegally, understanding that they weren't coming from Haiti directly, and they may have been employed and probably were certainly in better conditions and living conditions in South America than in Port-au-Prince. Is that about right?
Yeah, to a certain extent, although I can't blame the administration for making explicit decisions because I don't think they did. But by a number of Haitian migrants getting in the preceding months, their family in South America hears about that, so that they then start the trip, and that's
Yeah, so it's chain migration that we talk
But,
about,
you know,
but the left
yeah,
always
yeah.
disagrees with, like it's not occurring. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Representative Titus.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just kind of talk about the political situation in Haiti, if we could. I mean, by all external measures or empirical research, you could say that Haiti is just in an untenable, unsustainable situation. You've got the natural disasters that come periodically, whether it's earthquakes or hurricanes. You got no internal security. We've heard how bad the police are and how they don't have resources, and the gangs. You've got the economic situation, high unemployment and devastation of the education system. You've got politics and chaos. NGOs are ineffective. Other partners outside of Haiti are having a hard time figuring out how to come together to help. I mean, nothing could be more chaotic and unsettling than this whole situation. So now you've got the upcoming elections. They've been postponed twice. They're supposed to be early in 2020. The Biden administration says it expects them to occur and has asked for $8 million in the budget to help them occur. We don't know whether it's going to be just to ratify the new constitution, or will they be able to elect new members of a parliament and a new executive. Who's making those decisions? How do we know who to even negotiate with or who to try to help? Who's writing this new constitution? And do we have any way to have any kind of input into that? Because the last measures that they took were certainly unconstitutional by the existing system.
Congresswoman, you kind of hit the nail on the head with your question here. That's the $64,000 question. And that's the issue that I think the administration needs to think about deeply. The current de facto prime minister, Ariel Henry, was nominated by assassinated President Moïse 2 days before he was assassinated, but not installed. And then the international community made a decision after his death to anoint Henry over the guy who was the prime minister at the time. So the Haitians are see that as meddling and are not happy and do not see the current interim government as credible. There have been good dialogue processes, the best I've ever seen. I mean, they have agreements in Haiti. I didn't think that they would ever come up with an agreement when I first went down there. The civil society, the Montana group has one. I talked to them this morning. They realize that there are still some concessions that they need to make, that they're working through. The opposition politicians and most of the 10 remaining senators group has an agreement, and then the de facto prime minister has an agreement. I think everyone sees the US as supporting the current prime minister. It's critical that civil society has a voice in this new government. It's not critical that Ariel Henry and his administration has a voice in this new government. So I hope that our administration will stop imposing Ariel Henry on the Haitian people, because I believe they're very close to an agreement if they don't have to include the Ariel government, which is seen as an extension of the Moïse government, which is perceived as completely corrupt with impunity, ties to the gangs, et cetera.
Do you have any confidence that when these elections do finally occur, that they will be legitimate or will be seen as legitimate?
If done in the right way. It's a huge challenge and it's a lot of work. That the elections need to be acceptable to the Haitian people, or it doesn't make sense having them. Mm-hmm. And that's why they can't be imminent. The security situation itself is going to take, let's say a year. before people can get out and vote comfortably, but they need time to reform the Constitution. There are two constitutions, draft constitutions floating around. One is Moise's old constitution, which Henri has, and one is civil society, one that they've been working on for a couple of years. Last time they reformed the Constitution, it took them about 5.5 months. They already have a draft, and I think they could do that soon. So they envision 2 rounds of elections likely. One to vote on the Constitution, and then they would have follow-on elections for the president and all of the parliament and the mayors, et cetera, under the new Constitution. And they would like to install the new government in early 2023. That's the current kind of consensus there.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we need to focus some of our efforts on helping to be sure these elections can occur in a legitimate way. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Representative Levin.
Thanks so much. Chairman Meeks, thanks for your tremendous leadership towards figuring out a new policy on Haiti. Ambassador, I don't know if I want to say it's good to see you. I'm not happy to see you under these circumstances. I want to thank you for your service. Thank you for joining us today. I'm not only deeply upset by the circumstances that precipitated your resignation, and I'm glad to have this chance to discuss the situation with you transparently before the American people, but your down-to-earthness, your frankness, your at the same time, diplomatic skills, it makes me even sadder that you had to leave your post. In your resignation letter, sir, you mentioned that the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince issued a statement of support for the de facto Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, and touted his, quote, political agreement over the roadmap developed by an astounding number of groups in Haitian civil society for a real Haitian-led democratic transition. You said, and I'm quoting again, the hubris that makes us believe we should pick the winner again is impressive. Would you explain very briefly why you believe the embassy issued the statement of support for Henri?
So there were 2 statements issued by the core group, which is the international embassies in Haiti, but they almost always follow U.S. recommendations. And they first, on July, 17th, 18th, came out with a statement, the core group, supporting Ariel Henry as the new prime minister of Haiti. And then August 30th, the Montana group got their agreement. No statement by the core group, nothing acknowledging that there was a political accord agreement made. And then on September 11th, when Henri got an accord, the core group came together and immediately made a statement, or close after made a statement of support for Henri's agreement, encouraging all groups to get together and fuse all of the 3 agreements. But I think implying that Henri's agreement needs to be part of the final solution.
And why? I mean, this, as you say, he's actually, I believe, the 7th prime minister appointed by this de facto president who overstayed his welcome, led a kleptocracy, a gangsterization of the country. Why do we continue to do this?
I think it's risk. I think the risk of changing governments in a country like Haiti makes us nervous, to be honest with you. But Dr. Henri has said to me and other people several times that if the country wants him to step down, he will step down. I don't have anything personal against Dr. Henri, but again, the people, the consensus, almost unanimous outside the ruling party in Haiti, is that the ruling party, PHTK, put Haiti where it is today and probably doesn't deserve to be part of the solution. And I think
do you think absent U.S. support for it, Henri would, his government would survive or remain?
I do not believe they would survive or remain.
Yeah, so that's a very important factor. So you called the decision to deport Haitian refugees both inhumane and counterproductive. Obviously, we all know why it was inhumane, and you've described that well. Would you elaborate for us on why you think the deportations are also counterproductive?
Absolutely. The security situation, the economic situation, the health situation are all grave in Haiti right now. And we just had a major earthquake and a tropical depression in the south, and it needs to be reconstructed. Haiti's government and Haiti as a country cannot support the people it has there right now. The last thing they need is desperate people without anything to their names, because they just spent everything trying to get to the States,
Right.
coming back, and there's no safety net. It's just a recipe for human tragedy to me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, sir. And Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you know, I've been telling anyone who will listen since January that I believe U.S. policy towards Haiti is going in the wrong direction. I'm furious about this because I consider the August 30th Accord, signed by a stunning breadth of organizations of civil society, to be among the most important developments since the end of the Duvalier dictatorship in 1986. And also because I believe our current policy disrespects and fails to see the Haitian people, something our country has done over and over again since Haitians became the only people in the world to overthrow slavery and create their own country in 1804. Today, the Haitian people are crying out for the opportunity to chart their own country's course in the future and showing they're ready to do it. Ambassador Foote was doing a great job of figuring this out, and yet the United States is continuing to ignore their pleas. I strongly oppose these ongoing mass deportations and the administration's failure to embrace Haitian civil society's plan for a real and not just for show transition back to democratic self-rule. I'll continue to speak out and follow your leadership, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Representative Jacobs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for putting on this briefing, and Ambassador Foote, thank you for joining us and for all of your work. I think today so far we've talked a lot about the immediate situation, about the deportations, which I know was a big part of the reason you resigned. You also mentioned in your resignation letter that U.S. policy in Haiti overall is flawed. It's clear to me that our policy failures don't just start with this administration, but have gone back much further. I worked on Haiti in 2008. I worked on MINUSTA. I feel like we are having the same conversations over and over again, and nothing is changing. So I just wanted to know, in your view, what has the United States gotten wrong over the past several decades or even centuries in Haiti?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And I didn't know you worked on the news, to bless your heart. You're right. So we have never had a successful I guess our military interventions have restored stability, but our political interventions have never worked in Haiti. And as I said, I was part of the post-2010 earthquake. So I saw this develop in real time in one of our instances and was part of it. I feel responsible a little bit. We've always prioritized stability, which is critical, over going after the root causes of instability. And I believe the root cause of instability now is the Haitian people do not believe they have had a voice in their destiny and in selecting their leaders in a long time, because the elections always leave a question, and then the internationals come in and decide who it's going to be. And they strongly believe that if left to their own devices, and if we, the US and the international community, support their solutions, that things will be much better. And I agree with them. The political elite has traditionally just raped the country of its bounty, and the people never get anything. So it's time, I think, for the Haitian people want to hold the political elites accountable. And that's where these civil society and opposition political agreements are going.
Gotcha. Well, my next question was about the root causes of the drivers of violence, but you answered that. So thank you very much. I guess I want to move on. Again, your resignation letter goes far beyond the migration crisis that we've been talking about. Can you tell us about what other circumstances led to your decision to resign, including key disagreements with the Biden administration throughout your time as special envoy? And also, if during your time there, if there was any general understanding that the policies we were enacting were exacerbating the drivers of violence that you just enunciated?
The policy making apparatus, and I was only on the job for like a little over 2 months, so I didn't see a ton of it. But right after the assassination, I think the NSC got together with principals committees several times, but without having time to get the worker bees at the lower level committees together. And then I sat in a number of meetings with the worker bees. I became frustrated because I saw a lot of, I don't know what the right word is, lack of enthusiasm, let's say. One could say obstructionism, but I'll say lack of enthusiasm by other federal agencies who don't want to play in Haiti right now because it's complicated, it's hard, it's difficult. And I also found, as I'm running around talking about Haitian-led solutions and that the US this time is going to respect what they're doing, we had people in the administration backing Henri, I think almost blindly. And until I noticed that dissonance, which was about halfway into my thing, everything was going good. But from that point on, I could definitely see, my gosh, we're coming to a collision here at some point. And when I elucidated the problem in the State Department, it just wasn't to happen. I mean, we just had a disagreement on policy and on the position of the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince.
Great. Well, having been one of those worker bees, I am very familiar with when the information doesn't trickle up to those making decisions. So appreciate your perspective on that. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Representative Manning.
Thank you, Chairman Meeks, for holding this briefing on this really distressing situation. And thank you, Ambassador Foote, for being here today. So let me start by talking once again about the immigration issue, because in your resignation letter, you referenced the inhumane, what you call the counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees, and talked about the surging migration to our borders, which will only add to Haiti's unacceptable misery. So I wonder if you could talk to us about what you think the Biden administration should have done to better handle the border surge.
It's always easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, right? But, first of all, I was astounded, and I guess this is my own naivete because I'm not as important as I thought I was, but nobody asked me about the deportations. I found out about it on the news, just like the rest of us. And you would think, I thought, I'm the special envoy, so maybe when we're making policy decisions, someone comes to me and says, is this good? Is this bad? But it didn't happen. What I would have liked to see is, hang on, time out. We got 15,000 Haitians who are going to be here. Let's figure out how to treat them humanely and the path forward to process them and then arrive at the point where either they're deported or let into the country or they stay in Mexico or whatever. And what I saw is a plan. As soon as I saw it on the news, I started poking around in my email and I thought a plan to deport the majority of those people. And that's against international law. It's called refoulement. I have had tense discussions with other countries about doing that before, and now the United States is doing it. And I just couldn't be associated with the treatment and just the knee-jerk decision to send them back to Port-au-Prince. And many of them, I don't know if you've seen on the news, they get back to Port-au-Prince and they're interviewed and they say they're going back. That's the first thing they say.
So we know that in May, the administration announced a new 18-month TPS designation for people who are already here. Are there specific additional steps that you would recommend for Haitian people who are desperate to come here for legitimate reasons, including a fear for their lives and the lives of their families?
Look, everybody needs to make the best decision for them and their family. The United States current executive stand is it's too dangerous to come to the US. Conditions are bad. We've seen that. And I think that's a reasonable policy position for the United States, but we're not going to stop everybody with that policy position. And we need to be prepared to humanely receive, shelter, feed, and clothe, and process whomever from whatever country comes to our border.
So let me move to a different area. Representative Titus outlined the appalling state of affairs in Haiti with the confluence of so many problems. And one issue that she didn't touch on, and frankly, it may pale in comparison to the issues she outlined, but nevertheless, I think it's worth noting, and that is the barriers that Haitian women face in participation in public life. They're less likely to vote, to join political parties, to attend political rallies, to run for office. They have experienced targeted violence in connection with these and other political activities. And only 4 out of 149 parliamentarians in the last sitting parliament were women. So can you offer an overview of recent trends in this regard and in what is needed to improve women's full and equal participation in public life? You're on mute again.
Sorry, you're very right, Congresswoman. The women do not enjoy equality in Haiti, nor do other marginalized groups. But you can see just in the numbers in the legislature there. I would like to see, as they're looking at a new constitution and moving towards restoration of democracy, that they look at a mechanism to include more women in governance, as has been done in other countries. And I am optimistic because in these civil society dialogue processes going on, there are a lot of women and women leading some of these things. So for the first time in my 12 years or whatever of working on Haiti, I'm really starting to, for the first time, hear more than a few women's voices. I'm hearing the voices of a lot of strong Haitian women.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Representative Vargas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, especially Ambassador Foote, for being here today. I have to say that it really has been refreshing to hear your humanity, Ambassador. Very refreshing. This is the America that I know and love, where people have compassion and people want to follow the law, especially laws that we make in international law. I have to say that I was horrified with what I saw our country do to the Haitian migrants and immigrants that arrived in Del Rio, Texas. I thought it was a terrible overreaction by the administration. And frankly, I don't see any other way to describe it other than racism. I don't believe that if it had been any other group other than people who are Black, that we would have reacted this way. I think it's horrible. It's unconscionable. It's going to be a stain on this administration. I support this administration. Obviously, I do, but this is a horrible situation. I appreciate your candor and your nobility to stand forward and say this is unacceptable. I do, however, as others said, I wish that you were still there on the job because we actually need someone like you. But again, how do you explain, how can anyone explain this? You know, the truth of the matter is that I've lived along the border most of my life. I live in San Diego. We have surges. We have them all the time. We have them all the time as long as I've been a kid. And I've never seen anything thing, an overreaction like this ever. I mean, how is this explained? How can you explain this to us, Ambassador?
Congressman, I'm not.
You're muted. You're muted, Ambassador.
Don't worry, I'll get this tech thing down eventually. I can't explain it. I wasn't in the decision-making process, and so I won't even speculate.
I think the only thing I can think of, it was a horrible overreaction because of what our good friends on the other side of the aisle were saying. But again, I think it's simply unconscionable that we do that. I respect what you said with one caveat here. You said in your resignation letter, you wrote that you did not want to be associated with the U.S.'s inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees and illegal immigrants. I would say undocumented immigrants, of course.
Yeah, I got in trouble for that. I learned the politically correct term the hard way, Congressman.
Well, I wouldn't call it politically correct. I would say that it's incorrect to say illegal. A person's not illegal, is undocumented. But again, I appreciate that. And again, deporting these people to Haiti right now, knowing what's happening in Haiti is unconscionable to me. We have, the other thing that I can't understand is this. I read about some of these people who have training now in welding. I had 9 years in welding. Here in San Diego, we're begging for welders. Yeah. We're begging for welders. I mean, if God had ever provided an opportunity, an answer, it was there in this person. I thought, how can we deport this person to Haiti when we need him right here in San Diego building ships? I mean, it really mystifies me. And again, I appreciate what you've done. I would just hope that we have somebody else like you that comes along and helps in this situation, because this is a situation that is completely untenable. And again, like I said, I live along the border. We probably am closer than anybody else here living along the border. And the truth of the matter is we've always had surges. When something happens in Central America or in Mexico, we've always had surges, and we've never treated people this badly. I've never seen it before. So again, I thank you. But again, more has to be done, Mr. Chairman. I wrote a letter. I know you did. We've been outraged, but at the same time, people were deported to a situation where they should not have been. These people have every right to present themselves here and to get a fair shot at asylum. They weren't given that fair shot. We violated the law, and I hope that we can put pressure on administration to allow these people to come back and have an opportunity at least to prove their case up. They didn't get that opportunity. We put them on planes and we immediately send them off. It's a horrible situation. Again, but so much I thank you for this hearing. And again, thank you, Ambassador, for your humanity. I appreciate it. I yield back.
Next, we'll have Congresswoman Frederica Wilson representing the 24th Congressional District of Florida.
Good afternoon, and I thank you, Chairman Meeks, for having this briefing. I want to say to the envoy, I'm disappointed that you left. Just hearing you, I mean, you are just what we need. I want to share something with all of you. I am in touch with Haitian migrants' families who were detained at the border. And this is just an excerpt of what one of them sent to me. He was chained by his hands and feet. This is in detention. These are the ones, not the ones who were immediately sent back to Haiti, or these were people who were detained waiting to be deported. He was chained by his hands and feet. He was detained for 11 days and was deprived of sleep because he mostly stood and wasn't provided a bed. They seized his passport and have not returned it. He was not allowed to have any visitors. He was not allowed to call his family. He was not interviewed to determine whether he was eligible for asylum or had a sponsor. He was just crowded into a cell with hundreds of other men standing for 11 days, and then they were put on a plane and deported back to Haiti. That is unconscionable. And I just want to know if the federal government is aware of this cottage industry of smugglers and coyotes who are making billions of dollars from people that they're smuggling. And they're spreading misinformation to the Haitians in Chile and in Brazil. And they're telling them that TPS has been extended for them and they should come. So these Haitian migrants take all of their money, and they get money from their families, and they actually feel that they're going to come to the border, come into the United States, work, and send remittances back to their families. We know that there are 60,000 of them on the way to Mexico right now because of these coyotes. We need to stop that. And I want to ask the ambassador, tell us, how do you think the civil society, the diaspora, and all of the international community who want to get together to form a new government or start a new government, create a new government, because there is no government, who would be in charge of doing that?
Depending on the agreement, right? So there's three different current agreements. One, the current government would do, that's the de facto prime ministers. The civil society one is the one I'm most familiar with because it's the only one I've struggled through the whole thing in French. And it sets up committees and mechanisms who would choose interim president and an interim prime minister with some limited authority, so they can't spend all the country's money, et cetera, and moving forward. And these are the details that they're talking about now. How exactly do you choose? They've talked about imposing the restriction that anybody who holds senior office in the interim government can't run for office. I think that's a great idea because then they can't use the machinery of the state to help their campaign. So there are processes and mechanisms included in these agreements, but they're still working through the gory details.
Mr. Chair, I know I'm going to run over time, but the last election, I was there. I went as an election observer, and the ballot had approximately 56 candidates for president. And just how we look on the Zoom, well, this is how the ballot looked. And it was postage size people running for president on this ballot, and they were in color. And you had to find the president who you wanted and circle it. And I saw so much cheating. It was just people, you put your hand in ink, and indelible ink to say that you had voted. And then you go a block down and there was someone paid to wipe that indelible ink off of your finger, and you could go back and vote again. So this is one day of voting from 7 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday till 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. When it became dark, there are no street lights, it was just pitch black. And these people were still voting and cheating. So how do you do that? I mean, I don't even know how Mr. Moise won. I don't know how Martelli won. I was there. How do you select the president of Haiti when everybody's cheating?
I think the key to that, and you'll never have 100% clean election in Haiti or many developing countries, right, is to minimize the ability of the current government, whoever's in there, to influence the elections. And that's what always happens in Haiti. We sort of chose Martelly because there was a lot of controversy over runoffs back then in 2011, and the same thing with Moïse. And we can't do that again. We need to let the Haitians select their own president. If it's a runoff, it's a runoff. I would posit that some of the previous presidents and prime ministers in Haiti, particularly in recent administrations, have had their bite at the apple, and Haiti probably doesn't need them back again. People can infer who I'm talking about here, but Haiti doesn't need the same old politicians, the ones that are in Pandora's papers as corrupt. They need people who are looking for Haiti's best interests and the Haitian people.
Okay, thank you. I have like 20 other questions, but I believe my time is up.
Time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Our last questions will come from Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, representing the 9th Congressional District of New York. Congresswoman Clarke, you have 5 minutes.
I thank you, Ashley. Let me thank our chairman and the members of the Foreign Affairs Committee for allowing me to wave on for this conversation with Ambassador Foote. Let me thank you, Ambassador Foote, for your candor in joining us today, for your service to our country and your willingness to speak out about some of the more troubling aspects of our government's response to the recent events in Haiti and the plight of Haitian migrants. The world has now seen photos of the use of extremely aggressive tactics being used at our southern border in response to an influx of Haitian refugees. And it's been already stated within this briefing, many more are en route. Many of the migrants arriving at our borders have already been living in Central and South America for years and now face the threat of repatriation, deportation to Haiti, a country they haven't been in over a decade. Ambassador Foote, what are some of the challenges on the ground that these migrants face in returning to Haiti? And as you've described it in your resignation letter, a collapsed state.
So you arrive at the airport, some of them didn't even know they were flying back to Port-au-Prince. Most of them have very little money, if any. They don't have families still because the whole family's migrated, so they don't have a place to stay. They wind up only being able to go to the most devastated areas because that's the cheapest place. They don't have food, they don't have shelter, they don't have water. And I think the International Organization for Migration is giving them $100, which is something, but not going to get you very far, even in Port-au-Prince and in Haiti. And so they're sort of taking off the plane, giving $100, a pat on the back, and good luck to you. And we've already seen the already stretched infrastructure of sewage, water, trash, et cetera, in the slums is just breaking down completely because there's now too many people in some of these places.
So Ambassador Foote, let me sort of just wrap this into some of what I've heard from some of my colleagues. The dynamic right now in the hemisphere is one of multiple pressures. When you have a collapsed state run by gangs, and you have migrants who in the most productive years of their lives put back into that environment, aren't we somewhat feeding the beast? The young men that are being sent back there have a choice. They can try to struggle to survive and feed their families or fall in with the gangs. And I'm concerned that we've created a dynamic now that is going to be self-fulfilling. Would you give us a sense of, what a gang-run Haiti means in the midst of the Western Hemisphere, where narco trafficking has been a major concern for our nation, and all the other ills that are imported? Would you give us a sense of what your thoughts are about Haiti and its vulnerability in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's potentially catastrophic. Haiti sits 400 some miles off the United States coast. It has migrants now in virtually every country in the hemisphere, including a ton in the Caribbean and elsewhere. And not only is the US deporting, the Bahamas are deporting, Mexico is deporting, a bunch of other countries are deporting Haitians back to Haiti. The gangs are not trained insurgents. So when you have real security officials going in there, they will melt away much easier than the Taliban or the FARC in Colombia, because a lot of them are kids. I mean, not all of them, and they're not trained. But they need something to do. And that will be a huge challenge, is following in behind a security effort, because there needs to be some economic viability for these disenfranchised military age males, because there's just nothing to do there. So if you go back, it's not even like you have a choice. It's either you join the gangs or you don't have any income in many cases.
And just in closing quickly, what role do you believe members of the Haitian American diaspora here can and should play in assisting the effort to stabilize and rebuild Haiti? I'm from Brooklyn, New York. We have a diaspora that can absorb a significant number of these migrants. And when I hear colleagues talk about, the doors of the inn being closed, no room in the inn, I'm saying, I need more people in my district, but just for redistricting purposes. And those members could clearly fit here. But would you please respond? And I yield back after that, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for your indulgence.
I mean, Haitians have always opened their arms for follow-on immigrants after them, be it Brooklyn or Washington Heights or Miami or Montreal. I bet in your district, you don't have enough truck drivers, you don't have enough roofers, you don't have enough service people at the hotels. And so there is demand for people. Look, I'm not sticking up for breaking immigration law by any means, but that the Haitian diaspora will welcome the immigrants with open arms. And I would like to see them continue to involve themselves in the political process in Port-au-Prince, because I think they bring a lot to the table, given the fact that they have settled in societies that aren't run by impunity-driven politicians.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of the members that participated. As I listened to all the questions and the answers of Ambassador Foote, and just started thinking historically, how our immigration system has always historically treated Haitians differently than other immigrants and other nationalities. That's a fact. Notably, Cuba and Venezuela, they're treated differently, including, of course, the limited access to asylum. Historically, the United States has not recognized Haitians as facing political persecution. These are areas that we need to look at and change, and why, and face. As many of my colleagues said, I've never, ever seen some of the visions that I've seen at the border on the Del Rio Bridge with horses and what appeared to me to be whips, what was described as some tied into chains as if they were criminals and they were only trying to have refuge for themselves and their families. This is not something that can just be ignored. And just because those individuals are no longer under the bridge at Del Rio, this committee is going to stay focused on this issue. This committee is going to have further briefings on this issue. Now, we have to go after the root causes of instability. This is not the time to apply a Band-Aid. We need to commit to a major shift in US policy with Haiti. And I'm not just talking about immigration. I'm talking about the differential treatment of Haitian people, but in the way we treat Haiti among our foreign policy priorities in this hemisphere. It's got to be a focus. It's got to be a focus of this committee, I can guarantee you. So, and I do think, and I think I heard you say this, Mr. Ambassador, I am pleased with the appointment and finally the clearance by the Senate of Brian Nichols to be the Deputy Secretary for Western Hemisphere. I've worked with Brian Nichols on the Western Hemisphere very closely. I have confidence in Brian Nichols, and I hope that he's the right man at the right time to, in the policy of the Western Hemisphere, to make sure that it is as inclusive in it as any other country on the hemisphere. And I think he will. I look forward to working closely with him. I know he's going to testify before our subcommittee soon on a variety of things dealing with the Western Hemisphere. I also deeply believe that we should have another special envoy, hopefully someone as good as you, someone who's willing to take a fresh look at things, someone who's willing to talk to people who may not have been talked to before, and someone who would be consulted with, whether it be by the Deputy Secretary, whether it be by whoever is appointed as the next ambassador, and whose information thereby is considered as we move forward with whatever, with our next policy. So I conclude by saying I intend to hold as many conversations and briefings and hearings as needed to deepen our understanding of the situation at hand and offer our support to the people of Haiti as they find durable solutions to instability and forge a new durable solutions to instability and forge a new democratic way forward. And let me correct my title for Mr. Nichols. He's the Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere. As I said, I look forward to working with him. I have high respect for him. So again, thank you, Ambassador Foote. Thank you, members of Congress. Thank you, Representative Ceres, who's the chair of the Western Hemisphere subcommittee, who will have a hearing on the subcommittee coming up in the next few weeks. Thank you also, Representative Salazar, for standing in for Ranking Member McCall and all the members on this committee. I was very pleased with the number of members that came on and asked questions and stayed on. It shows the interest of the United States Congress. And I think, Ambassador Foote, we will look to take a delegation to Haiti sometime in the near future. And with that, this briefing is now adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.